Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show. And I got to tell you, I have a great privilege because I knew of Naomi Wolf a while back, but only in a cursory way. And in the last, I guess, year or two with the whole COVID fascism, I've been watching her most closely. And I got to say, this woman is a liberal, which of course today means nothing.
Nothing. Right.
Because the liberals are the fascists or the neo-fascists, and so are a lot of conservatives, quote unquote. I don't know what they want to conserve. It's basically no liberty left to conserve. And Thomas Massey, the congressman, is usually pretty good. But other than that, these political whores are just, they have no integrity. And that's what makes you stand out. We can have disagreements in this world. I was talking to Bobby Kennedy in Manhattan, and he and I also disagree on many things. However, when it comes to the most fundamental things like the Bill of Rights and our health and our ability to control our health and the Nuremberg Code, these are things that are very fundamental. And on those things, there is no disagreement, zero.
I agree with you.
I'm going to start off. I know you've written a book called The Bodies of Others. And a lot of people would think it's an abortion book, but it's not. It has to do with our own sovereignty over our health. And of course, related to the subtitle, The New Authoritarians. And the new authoritarians are not the liberals, because whatever happened to question everything, question authority, dissent, the Mario Savio free speech movement, it's gone.
Gone.
I would never stop a leftist from speaking, never. But I'm sure as hell not going to let them stop me from speaking. And you are speaking out, and you're speaking out for freedom. You're speaking out for the Constitution. So tell us, did you have an epiphany, or has this been a consistent view that you've had for a long time?
Well, thanks for asking, Mr. Unger. And, when you were speaking about left and right agreeing on the basic issues, which are our beloved Constitution, I couldn't agree with you more. And I was also just going to say that used to be America, right? Like, I'm old enough to remember when, of course, you would take for granted that people could differ on whatever, abortion or environmentalism or, fossil fuels, and that we could discuss it civilly, and we could, find policy solutions that were compromises, and we could uphold our beloved freedoms above everything. And that is sadly no longer the case. And I sadly have to agree with you, as someone who's been on the left or the liberal side my whole career, that unfortunately I haven't changed at all. But I've always, since 2008, when I wrote The End of America and looked at how easily history shows we can lose our freedoms, how democracies die so easily because there's a blueprint to kill them off that left and right tyrants always use. Ever since that time, I've just been talking about the Constitution. And to my astonishment, this time around, in the last 2 years, there's been a gigantic targeting of the West, a targeting of our individual rights over our bodies, our families, our communities, our freedoms of speech. And the left has become, weirdly censorious and weirdly authoritarian. And I haven't changed at all. So, my concerns have always been the same. And I'm astonished that the tradition that, as you rightly point out, used to include the free speech movement and the Howell trial against censorship and the Lady Chatterley's Lover trial against censorship, all the way back to the great liberal tradition in Britain with, publishing and Thomas Paine and Areopagitica, hundreds of years of championing freedom of speech. And now the liberal tradition has kind of petered out and died. And there's this monolith of censorious authoritarians who embrace the pandemic as an opportunity to create kind of CCP style socialist culture in America.
I interviewed Dr. Alan Katz, who is from the same school as you, Yale. And he is not only a medical doctor of 45 years, he's also a lawyer. And you're talking about a great intellect. And I interviewed him as well as many other doctors. And everybody was writing on the various social media that these people should be incarcerated.
Unbelievable.
Incarcerated. So-called liberals saying that a doctor expressing his heartfelt and very well reasoned opinion should go to jail. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people like you who are unafraid and speaking out. I personally, I'm 68 years old. Someone told me yesterday that I'm going to be killed if I keep talking the way I do. And frankly, I couldn't care less because I'm willing to be killed. I have no problem because I'm not going to back down no matter what. I'm to the point now, it was like the Maccabees, in the holiday of Hanukkah, when they were outnumbered incredibly by the Greek Empire, and they weren't going to give in. And that's me. You can call me stubborn. You can call me a male chauvinist pig. You can call me a technophobe, a dinosaur, whatever name, a racist.
I don't do any of those things. Go ahead.
Whatever. But I couldn't care less. I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to back it up with tremendous knowledge and reading constantly and studying and refining my views. My views have changed a lot. When I was younger, I was a traditional Republican, whatever you want to call me. Now, forget about it. I wouldn't vote for Republican except maybe Thomas Massey. But other than that, I'm like George Carlin, when he said, don't blame me, I don't vote. Just want to vote for any of these people. So did you go through any kind of a process in writing this book, starting out initially from the whole beginning of the COVID, which, by the way, I saw as an agenda right away. There was something very strange about this. And did you go through an evolution, or did you have an immediate discerning of what was happening? Explain to us.
So that's a great question. Well, since I had written this book and a sequel to it, The End of America, 12 years before, I did recognize early on the danger signals, probably before a lot of people. I knew, for instance, from looking at history for that other book and its sequel, that emergency law is always a bad thing. And that once the powers that be declare that you're living under emergency law, it's very, very hard to get your republic back and to get your legislature back, whether that's on the state or the federal level. So where I live in New York State, the governor declared emergency law, and a lot of people don't know that emergency law was declared in 33 states. And our president, Biden, for whom I'm embarrassed to say I voted, extended the federal state of emergency in an open-ended way about a month ago. So history shows that that's catastrophic, and that usually, historically, you don't get your democracy back when there's a state of emergency without, a civil war or a counter coup. And I hate to be that blunt, and I'm a peaceful person. I'm not calling for violence. I'm just saying history shows that that's, what people don't understand is there has basically been a coup in the United States of America and in other former democracies like Australia, like Canada. We saw in Canada, he declared emergency law. Parliament was suspended till he backed off. In Australia, Parliament was sent home. I interviewed Baroness Claire Fox in Britain, who said that they were sent home, during the pandemic, and they were having their meetings on third-party tech platforms, a total breach of security. So emergency law is always dangerous. And I also recognized the way that real dangers are hyped when there's an agenda, as you so rightly point out. During the Bush era, the last time I wrote about it in detail, it had been terrorism. Now, terrorism is real. We had been attacked, but it was also hyped and manipulated as a message in order to pass things like the Patriot Act and to get us used to 360-degree surveillance, and to pass the National Defense Authorization Act in 2012 that gives the executive the power to detain Americans without charge or trial indefinitely. But I'm nonpartisan. I just care about the Constitution. So when Obama droned American citizens without charge or trial and had a kill list. I was one of like 3, Democrats saying, wait a minute, this is what a tyrant does. And so consequently, when there was this gigantic lockdown worldwide, and I heard that people in Italy, it was the first I heard of it in March of 2020, someone said, oh, I can't go see my mom in Italy because Italy's under lockdown. I knew exactly what that meant. I knew that that would be exported around the world because that was such a draconian thing. And I knew from history that who's under lockdown in the West? The Warsaw Ghetto is under lockdown in the West. North Korea locks down its people. No one else, the definition of Western societies is that you have freedom of assembly and freedom of movement. I mean, that's in the Charter of Rights, it's in UN charters, it's in our Constitution, freedom of assembly. So that was super scary. And I guess I realized by about June or July, I started to say on social media, they're never going to let us out. It became clear to me that this was not about a disease. It was about stripping us of our liberties. With the research that I've done in the bodies of others, I do now understand what the profit motive is and what the goal is long term. And it's pretty sweeping. I mean, the reason the subtitle is the war against the human, right? COVID-19, the new authoritarians and the war against the human, is that the pandemic actually gave big tech companies, and I'm in tech, I'm CEO of a successful tech company, so I'm privileged to kind of understand how their business model works. The pandemic and pandemic-related policies gave tech companies the opportunity to win, finally, a war against things that human beings do better than machines, and to garner billions of dollars in profit by winning that war. And what I mean is the policies, they were weird to start out with, right? They didn't make sense. Distancing, right? There have been infectious diseases throughout human history. If distancing the healthy, would solve them, that would have been discovered before 2020, right? Killing school, killing worship, churches and synagogues, killing small businesses, as I mentioned, killing travel, killing assembly, killing theaters, killing concerts, killing culture, right? None of these things make epidemiological sense. The data quickly came in that, Texas and Florida and South Dakota and Sweden did exactly the same as California and New York and all these locked down countries and states. So what sense did they make? Well, those are things humans do better than machines, right? You can't, when people are gathered together in a church or a synagogue worshiping, there's no data being generated. There are no ads being sold. When kids are in-person learning with a live teacher, there's no data generated, and you're not selling software, right? When people are not allowed to shop at their local mom and pop store, then Amazon gets double-digit increases in their revenue. And I tracked all of these money flows. It was basically a gigantic theft of assets from the middle classes to a few giant companies, mostly related to tech. But there were industries I tracked, like meal kits had been dog businesses, like loser businesses. Who wants a meal kit? And they had investment from big tech companies. Well, they were off the charts, appeared overnight, all these different branded meal kits, booming IPOs, right? Same thing with distance learning. I had looked in 2015 at distance learning platforms. Nobody wanted them, because who wants to be home on a computer instead of in an in-person classroom with your peers and with a real teacher or a real lab or a real pottery studio or whatever it is you're learning? Nobody does. Losing millions of dollars, but they had big tech investment, and overnight Coursera and other platforms for distance learning were 1/3 to 1/2, doubling their revenue or their net profits. And this happened over and over. It happened to Zoom, it happened to Amazon, it happened to Google, it happened to Microsoft. So why would they ever say the pandemic was over? And why would they ever let humans reassemble and take back all of that extra profit?
And what I get all the time is, well, no government would ever allow that to happen to their own people. See, this is, you talked about history. History is the most important subject. I'm a successful investor because I know history. I understand the role of gold. I understand the role of debt because I've gone back for hundreds of years, because the learning that occurs from history is phenomenal.
Hmm.
I'm a lawyer. If I went around the town of Great Neck, New York, where I live, which is a very affluent, area, yeah, and if I asked any of these people in the street, could you please explain to me a basic parameter of what you know about the Constitution of the United States?
Mm.
There isn't one person, including all the lawyers, because I was never taught the Constitution. I was taught what judges say about the Constitution.
Wow.
It's a Rorschach test for these people.
Hmm.
I actually read the Federalist Papers, because if I want to know what something means, I might as well read the words of the people who wrote it.
Yeah.
But of course, they'll never tell you to do that in law school, because now everything is the case method.
Hmm.
Precedent. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to follow precedent. You have to follow the Constitution. And it's the same thing. Look, I'm not the most religious guy in the world, but you can't tell me that if you're Jewish and you eat bacon, obviously you have a right to eat bacon if you want to, but don't tell me that that's Jewish.
Right. Right.
And if you want to imprison people in their homes, well, if you got enough power, you can do it, but don't tell me that's constitutional. And don't tell me that an emergency is the reason why you're usurping or abrogating the Constitution, because the purpose of the Constitution is just for those times.
Absolutely.
Emergency.
That's really scary, that what you just told me, that lawyers now are not being taught the Constitution.
Zero.
But case law instead. That's extremely disturbing. And I agree with you about history. And I'll also say that one of the things that happened in the last 2 years, and I touch on this in the bodies of others, is through a lot of money and a lot of CCP influence, our history got erased. A lot of our history got erased. One of the things that digital archives can do is censor history without you even knowing about it, because through using algorithms and SEO, Google can make certain links or events in history invisible and surface others, right? Or surface Wikipedia's version. And so, for example, when you look up, I've noticed changes in this. When you look up the French Revolution now, there's less and less about the rights of man and the Enlightenment idea of, inalienable human rights, and more links that are about economics and economic disparity and equity. And that's a change. I looked around in my own little community, which is a very historic area, the Hudson Valley. Well, all of the whole world is historic, obviously, but I saw that 2 years later, through influence of the CDC and through influence of local government, state government, why I can't go to Robert Livingston's mansion. He was involved with the founding, documents of our country. I can't go to Van Buren's mansion. I can't go to, the Olana, where one of the great painters lived. Like, all these historical sites around the Hudson Valley are still closed, and school children are not being brought to them. And, Black Lives Matter, which I'm a big supporter of racial equality, but I think it's so interesting that in multiple countries, the targets were statues, of historical figures in the West, or, books by historical figures in the West. You had to erase the names of things, change them. I mean, Woodrow Wilson is not, he's a flawed president. Everyone has done things that don't stand up to the light of contemporary mores, just like things we're doing.
He certainly used emergency as an excuse to imprison people dissenting against the war.
Oh, well, that's a very good point. But I still was shocked that Princeton erased Woodrow Wilson's name, from one of their buildings. I mean, there was just this erasure of Western history and this redefinition of Western history and Moors as, oppressive or inevitably racist, when really we need to know our history to make it more and more inclusive. The other thing I want to say to you about history, and I'm glad we're talking about this, I'm glad we're talking about being Jewish, because this is so germane. I'm Jewish. I'm the granddaughter of a grandmother who lost 9 siblings in the Holocaust, tragically. And I've got a chapter in my book on restrictions, and you as an investor will, I'm sure, resonate to this. If you look at the history of the Jews in the 19th century, in Germany, before they got full civil rights, they were restricted in a bunch of different ways. You know, they couldn't walk certain places, they couldn't join certain societies, they couldn't go to certain schools. And there was a big fight to get them, you know, some level of parity. Again, in Vichy France, Jews were restricted. You know, they lost their civil rights. They couldn't go certain places. They couldn't eat in certain restaurants, second-class citizens.
They were put in concentration camps.
Well, certainly that, the dramatic example of where restrictions inevitably go. But fast forward, this group of people who had been so restricted for centuries came to the United States. And it's not the money that was the blessing when our people came to America. It was the freedom. And in one generation, without restrictions, in one generation where they could go where they wanted to go, you know, attend the universities they wanted to attend, with some exceptions, of course, you know, worship freely where they wanted to worship, you know, engage in commerce without restrictions, they blossomed and had an impact culturally and economically and in every way. And that's true. You see this in history. Native Americans, when they were restricted, restrictions are a preface to theft and asset transfer. And I saw this over and over when I looked at, wow, restrictions are suddenly all around us. All of humanity is being restricted. Where have I seen that before? And that's what happened in the pandemic. The target wasn't one ethnic group, though. It was human beings. Human beings were put under restrictions. You have to wear this over your face. You have to stand this far apart from other people. Your child, you know, can't go play with another child. You're all restricted. You can't open your shop. You can't go where you want to go. And that was a precedent or that preceded asset transfer, theft of assets, theft of resources, a massive transfer of wealth from small businesses, small landlords to gigantic entities like BlackRock, which came in and swooped up, you know, for instance, residential housing, which I have a section on, but all kinds of business closures, restaurant closures, 100,000 restaurants closed. And who are those people? Immigrants, you know, first generation, people who worked and saved and labored to get that one little restaurant or that one little rental property. Punished. The people who are crushed. Yeah,
absolutely crushed.
That was the purpose of these restrictions, to leave you like, what are you going to do if the state says you can't transact? What are you going to do?
I know you're very pressed for time, but I want to leave with two quick rhetorical questions. Number one, there's never been a people more destroyed by their own government throughout history than the Jews. From Egypt, we can keep going, Greece, Rome, Babylon, you name it. Spain, England, United States, a lot of places. And yet there is no people that loves government more than the Jews in general, majority. And I have to ask the question, why would you ever want to put power into the hands of these swine, other than what the Constitution allows? The second thing is, no group of people ever needed, especially in Germany, where they had gun control in the Third Reich, which is a very good book, well, Gun Control in the Third Reich.
Wow.
Never needed a gun to defend themselves more than Jews. And yet they voluntarily leave themselves defenseless. Jabotinsky pointed this out in 1936 when he told the Jews, I've got ships for you. You're going to be killed. Get out of the diaspora before the diaspora finishes you.
Wow.
They said, you're crazy. You're a conspiracy. That's their new thing now. You're a conspiracy theorist. If you think an Italian guy winds up in cement because he slipped, then I guess it's okay. But if you think somebody actually put him there because they wanted to put him there, you're a conspiracy theorist instead of an accidental theorist, which is what all these people who don't want to come to grips with the totalitarianism, and as your book uses the word authoritarianism, that we're heading into. And that's not Republican, it's not Democratic, it's authoritarian government. It can come from the left or right. I'm against all authoritarian government.
Mhm.
Roger Marx, I don't know if you like Roger Marx, he has a movie called Horse Feathers.
Yeah.
And he sings a song because he's a professor at a university. And he sings, whatever it is, I'm against it. That's me. Whatever it is, I'm against it. Whatever the masses invest in, I sell. Whatever the masses sell, I invest in. Whatever they believe, I disbelieve.
Wow.
Ukraine. Have you ever seen more unanimity on one subject than on Ukraine? There's not one dissenter that's allowed to say, wait a minute, Putin is not a good guy, but wait a minute, this whole war is making a lot of money for defense contractors. We're sending billions of dollars when people are homeless all over the streets of New York and California and other places, and we're giving them our money for what? Meanwhile, Ukraine has Nazi groups that are very, very endemic there. And not that I love Putin, because obviously I'm not going to love a former KGB guy, but that's not the point. The point is it's unanimous on one side, and nobody in the media, I don't care if it's Fox News or CNN, any of these phony media companies, nobody questions it. I had a big argument with a very famous guy. I won't mention his name, but he owns a network. And he was outraged that I was against the war. I'm against all wars, frankly, unless it's absolute self-defense. It's a different story. But Naomi, I'm going to let you go. Everyone should get her book because she is an honest person. She's like Diogenes. Remember when he was going on and they said, what are you doing with? He had a candle and he said, I'm looking for an honest man.
Thank you.
This is an honest woman.
Thank you.
Have conversations with an honest woman. And it doesn't matter if she's not a right-wing extremist like I am, which I proudly admit. But we've got to be honest. We got to talk to each other. The greatest thing about being with Bobby Kennedy about, I guess that was a month and a half ago in Foley Square in Manhattan, is the incredible amount of people that were from every diverse. There were Farrakhan people, they were Chinese people, there were Spanish people, all Jewish, religious Jews, all kinds of people. And the brotherhood was incredible because everybody was on the same page. And unless people like yourself, people like Bobby Kennedy, people like me, I'm a nobody. I'm not trying to set myself up as any great person. I'm simply saying people like me. If we don't get together, as Ben Franklin said, we better stick together or we're going to hang separately.
Very true.
Hopefully, because of people like you, that can be prevented. So God bless you.
Thank you.
And I hope all the luck with this book and everything good in your life should happen.
Thank you so much. Well, same to you. And I appreciate the conversation. And I do agree and believe that when we fight together, we can save our country. So thank you so much for that lovely conversation. I appreciate it.
God bless you. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Take care. Bye-bye.